Hello, welcome or welcome back to my channel. Today we're ranking all of the books that I've read this year. I will put the categories on the screen as to how I am ranking them. Let's start with a book that I've been talking about quite a bit on my channel called Sedated. The full title is Sedated: How Modern Capitalism Created Our Mental Health Crisis. This is immediately going into the top category of you need to read this because this book is amazing. I don't want to oversell it, but it's just got some very interesting paradigm shifts, or just like bringing up interesting history about the UK mental health system and the government, and about like regulation even. There's just lots of stuff. It's very jam-packed, but it's also very easy to read. Like, it doesn't feel very heavy, but it is covering quite a lot of ground, so I highly recommend this. I read the first 2 pages and I was instantly hooked. I literally sent a photo of the second page to my friend who also loves books, and I was like, I'm reading this and you have to read it too because it's so good. So that immediately, easy to rank, goes in the top category. I really recommend you read this book. We can next go for this book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, which is another book I've been talking about in some of my recent videos, like my You Don't Need a Winter Arc, You Need to Slow Down video. And Sedated I mentioned in my consumerism video that I posted yesterday. I don't know when this video will be going out, but I will link both of those in the description if you would like to watch those videos, because I talk about these books. There's quotes from the books, the ideas of consumerism, capitalism, and this book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. I read this in February, but it has really stuck with me. It's another one that's very easy to read. It's a different format. There's quite a lot of space between the pages. There's like random chapters. It's a spiritual book, but also like a religious book. It does talk about the Bible quite a lot. I find that really interesting because it's like he goes into different parables, different stories to reinforce the points that he's making. All around thought-provoking book. Those two may be some of my top books of the year. In fact, another one that is a top one, yeah, this one, Cast: The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson, also goes in top category because it's amazing, and I would put it on like the same level or even above the level of the two we just talked about. I read Cast in May. The notes I made as I read it were book of the year so far without a doubt, eye-opening, amazing, anger-making and sad, radicalizing. Yeah, I think that's a good summary of that book. Highly recommend. Those 3, highly recommend. So we're off to a good start. I want to mix it up a bit. I don't want them to all be like, you must read this. There are ones that go in the other categories. So for example, in the bottom category of I read it but I should have given up, I'm putting Alias Grace by Margaret Atwood in there. I, in my head, have been pronouncing it Elias Grace, but it's Alias Grace. I got this book out of the library. The thing I did not like about this book is she doesn't pick an ending. At one point I was like, oh, is this going down the supernatural horror route? Or is it going down like the kind of it's all in her head, or like this is a distortion of reality, like an unreliable narrator kind of thing. And so I was really hooked because I was like, oh my gosh, which is it gonna be? And then in the end, it doesn't really give you an answer. It felt like such a waste of time having invested it because it's quite a long book as well. So it's like 500 pages probably. And I enjoyed the experience of reading it. So I guess that's like good enough. But it wasn't a very satisfying book to read because I expected there to be an answer and there wasn't. And it was just like, oh, come on. Like, be brave, pick an ending. The problem is it's a story that's based on a true story, or it's like inspired by true events, so maybe she thought that she couldn't go off on a tangent with it because people might be like, wait, is this what actually happened? Is this real? But I'm like, you're writing a fiction book, a lot of the details will have been made up. Can you not just be brave enough to pick an ending? I don't know. I'm putting this in, I read it, but I should have given up. The Beauty Myth, I'm putting it in took me way too long to read because I've actually not finished reading it yet. The category of took me too long to read, I didn't know whether to make 2 separate categories, one brackets good and one brackets bad, because there are some, and this is a good example, where there's a lot to process, so it feels like I need to take my time to read it. So The Beauty Myth is one of those, and then there are other ones where it took me way too long to read, and I think that's because I didn't enjoy the book and I was like just putting it off. But we've just gone with one category of took me way too long to read. The Beauty Myth is going in there. I've read I think 100 pages. A lot of these books I get out from the library, and if it's one that's been reserved by someone else after me, you can't renew it. I ran out of time and I had to return it to the library, and then I have got a secondhand copy so I could read it. I've not gone back to it, but I need to because it's really good. Another example of a library book, oh my gosh, The Defector, I'm putting this in. I read it, but I should have given up. I got this from the library for my granny actually to read, and then she didn't like it, but I was like, I quite like the look of this, I'm gonna read it. And I really should have given up. I don't know why I kept persisting with it. I thought it was gonna get good. I mean, on the front cover it says like true Cold War thriller. Like, I was like, I think I would like this, but it almost felt like very aware of itself. Like, I felt very aware that I was reading a story. I never really felt engrossed in the story itself. It felt almost like, not mechanical, but there was just something about it that I couldn't get into, but also probably didn't help that there was a chapter dedicated to this dog dying. Now, having read the whole thing, I'm like, oh, that chapter was supposed to be the first clue to the reader that the main character is actually horrible, but you don't know that. He's like a double agent and they think he's defected, but he's not. So this chapter of him poisoning a dog is supposed to be the first thing to the reader of like, you think he's on the American side, but he's not. Like, look how horrible he is. But I was like, this is just so unnecessary and it felt so out of place. And I was like, why am I continuing to read this? But then I continued reading it because I thought it would get good. And to be fair, the climax of it was interesting. Mass poisoning of the camp, and like none of the people died, but like, why did the dog have to die then, you know? There was like explosions, power cut, he like commandeers a helicopter and goes, like, it was exciting, but I was just like, there was something I didn't like about it, and there were multiple points where I was like, should I just give up on this? And I was like, no, I'm gonna keep reading it, but really, I read it, but I should have given it up, so that's why I'm putting it in that category. I'm putting The Creative Act, A Way of Being in. Took me way too long to read, because I got this in April, and then I think I finished it in July. And it is, in fairness, the kind of book that you can dip in and out of. You don't have to like hold on to a narrative. Like, I could pick up now and just read, like flip randomly to any page. The book is here actually. You can see it's quite a hefty book. I could flip to any page and read anything, any chapter. You can see the way it's formatted. It's got like quotes. It's all just about like being creative. These are all a little bit different, like they're like mini, not mini essays, but I did take quite a few notes when I was reading this book. Like, there is definitely a lot of wisdom in here, but I don't know if someone had oversold me on it and I was like so excited to read it. Like, I literally bought my own copy, you know, which is not rare. I do buy books, but generally I try and get them out of the library instead. But this one I was like, no, I have to have my own copy because then I can come back to it and read it again and again. I don't know what it is, but maybe I had too high expectations and it wasn't able to match them. It took me a long time to read. I don't know if in this sense it's a good thing or a bad thing, whether it was, you know, I wasn't engaged enough or I just needed the time. I'm not sure, but it's certainly interesting, and if you are a creative person, I would definitely recommend seeing if your friend has a copy or if you could go to the library and see if they have a copy, because you might get a lot out of it, but I think part of it is quite expensive and I do maybe regret buying it. I don't know, who knows? The thing about books is you may read it one time and you have a certain takeaway, but then you might read it the next year or a couple years later and it affects you in a completely different way because you're at a different point in your life. I feel like if I read this at a different point, maybe it would have a different impact, so that's quite exciting and one of the reasons books are so cool. I'm putting The Worm at the Core on the roll of death in life. This is going in the existential brackets but necessary category. I read in February and did kind of affect me in a bad way for a little bit. Maybe I should have read this in the summer when it was lighter and generally my mood is a bit better, but in February it was probably not a good time to read this book. But I am glad I read it and it is very interesting. It's all about like the mechanisms of, the bits that I'm remembering now are like the mechanisms of denial that we use when we talk about death. I think part of that is like part of this book has been blocked out because some of the things that it's talking about, you know, it is quite morbid. It's more like approaching it from a philosophical, no, not even, looking throughout history. It is interesting. I don't want to put you off reading it. Maybe be in a certain headspace or just go into it like hearing what I've said now and be aware of it. I'm glad I read it. I would recommend it in that sense. I read The Alchemist. I'm putting this in the thought-provoking. I read this in a day. It was very easy to read. It felt a little bit like The Little Prince, if you read that book, but a more fleshed out version, I guess, because The Little Prince is a children's book. It was interesting, but a lot of the takeaways I feel like didn't resonate with me, or like I've already experienced them, or I'm not sure. Again, maybe if I read it now at a different point I would be more interested or have different takeaways from it, but for now it goes in the thought-provoking category. I'm putting The Book of Moods in fun, light, easy to read. I want to actually reread this. Someone who subscribed to my channel, Julie, thank you. Julie recommended this book and I actually have a copy of it here, so I am going to reread this one. It was very easy to read. It made me think about some things, and it's also just nice to read something like this and realise, oh yeah, I'm not alone if I'm like all over the place sometimes or scattered or whatever. Like, it was a good book. I think if I read it now with a more practical lens it might be better. Before I was reading it just to like read it and enjoy it, but if I read it again I would be thinking more about like how can I apply this as opposed to just like how do I resonate with this? The kindness method. This took me too long to read. This again was recommended by someone who subscribed and commented about this book. B, thank you very much. I have my own copy of this now because the thing happened where I got it from the library and someone else had reserved it after me, so it had to go back and I hadn't finished it. I was like, let's get a copy of this because this is a very practical book. Like, it talks about ways to journal, ways to write. So I got my own copy because I was like, yes, that means I can take my time doing the exercises, but I've not actually finished reading it yet. Putting this in too long to read category, but in a good way. I feel like this is not something you want to rush through. You want to like take your time doing the exercises. When the Emperor Was Divine goes in, you need to read this book because you do. I got this from the library on a whim. I love going in there sometimes and just picking up a random book. Yes, I do reserve quite a few if I know I want to read something, but it is also fun just to like go and browse. And this was one of them. It was only, I think, 120 pages long. It's not very long, but it was really atmospheric. I really appreciated the time I spent reading this, you know, like it was an all-round good experience and I enjoyed it. It was thought-provoking. So yes, you need to read this book. It is really good. Convenience Store Woman, I'm putting that also as you need to read. My friend Kate recommended this to me. I'm so glad she did. I read this around my birthday this year, which was quite strange because I resonated so much with it, but it made me feel weird. It's all about how this woman works in this convenience store and she works there over many years, and so she sees people come and go and she adopts like different people's mannerisms and she's like trying to fit in, or she's aware that other people view her as not normal, but she's like, no, I love my job at the convenience store. And meanwhile her sister and her sister's friends are all like getting married and they look down on her because she doesn't have a partner, and in the end she ends up asking someone who works at a convenience store with her to be her boyfriend, just to pretend, just to like show to other people like, oh yes, this is my boyfriend, because he's like this horrible character. It was just very interesting because it was like, what do we sacrifice of ourselves in order to fit in? Or what pressure do we have to do what everyone else is doing, even if that's not necessarily what we're interested or what we want to do. I think that one's like 150 pages. It's fairly easy to read, but it's got quite a profound message that will make you think a lot, so really recommend that. I'm putting Outer Order, Inner Calm by Gretchen Rubin in fun, light, easy to read, because this is like a beginner's guide to clutter clearing. She just goes through different stages of tidying up. It's like lists of different tips and it comes with like little drawings. It's not like pages and pages of text. So it is easy to read. It would probably make a good gift for someone who's interested in that kind of thing. Tracy Buchanan, Venom in, what is that? Is it Venom in the Blood? I read this. Actually, let's start with her other one that I read. Where is that one? Wall of Silence. They are both in fun, light, easy to read. I read Wall of Silence, I think it was on a Kindle offer, so it was 99p. There are some books on my Kindle which are just like sat there and I forget that I have, but this one I was like, no, let's read this one. I really enjoyed it. I read it in the summer and it just felt really absorbing. I got a really good sense of the environment and the setting, and it was interesting, like I couldn't predict it. Kind of a murder mystery. I mean, it's not like the most well-written thing, but for like a beach read or just for something light, like it doesn't have to be like, oh, this made me think so much about whatever. Like I can sometimes think, oh no, I've not read any classic books or whatever. It's like, no, this was fun. I really enjoyed the experience and I have such a clear memory of sitting on my bed in June as it was getting dark and I've read like 2 hours of this book. Like I really enjoyed it, and that's what reading should be, right? And then after I read that, because I really enjoyed that book, I think I pre-ordered this book. I think this was her new book, Venom in the Blood, which came out in October. And after reading Wall of Silence, I was like, yes, I loved this story. Like it was atmospheric. So I'm gonna pre-order her next book because at the end it said pre-order this new book coming in October. So I did, and I then read it, and it was another murder mystery. It was quite good. Again, really clear idea of setting. Like when I think back on it, I'm like, oh yeah, I've got a really clear picture of like how the village was laid out. It wasn't predictable, I don't think, in terms of like working out like who was the culprit. It was maybe a bit absurd at the end, but like again, I'm putting it in the fun category. Like it was a bit like, yeah, sure, why not? Like, okay, that's gonna happen now. It was fun, I liked that. Blueberries by Elena Savage, I'm putting in thought-provoking. This is a book of essays. I was kind of at a weird time I read this. Like I should have maybe given this more space. It was very busy and there was lots of stuff happening, so I don't feel like I gave this my full attention. So it was quite weird to read it at the beginning because I was quite distracted, which is a shame because I think maybe the first essay is the most important one. But she did have some really interesting insights and I really like the way she writes. It felt like a very fresh and unique way she would describe things, the imagery she would use. It felt really new, so I do like her writing and I think I'm gonna look into some more of her. A Court of Silver Flames. It's fun, like easy to read, but I'm gonna put it into you need to read this in the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. This is the 5th one. I reread this because I have, you can see this is one I have. I really like this series, and you may have heard of it, may not. I like it. I like the twist in like the 2nd book. I like the setting, I like the characters. It's good. I would say you need to read this book. Breathing Underwater, I'm putting in thought-provoking. I read this at an interesting time as well. It's talking about the 12 steps from I guess from a Christian standpoint, or at least from a spiritual standpoint. It was good, but I was feeling a bit weird at this point in time about recovery stuff, so it was a strange time to read this book, but I'm also glad I read it, and it had some good reflections in. Edge of Eternity, I am saying I read it, but I should have given up. This is a Ken Follett book, and if you know anything about Ken Follett, you know that he writes really long books. This one was no exception, and although I liked the rest of this series, this one I could have given up because, unlike the other books in the series, this book had characters that are based on historical figures. So it had like JFK or Martin Luther King Jr. Who else? They were like real historical people as characters, and so I couldn't really get into it because anytime I was reading a scene between JFK and whoever he's talking to, I was like, but this isn't real, right? Like, he was a real person, but this is a book written about him, it's not real. So it was quite distracting, and the other books in the series weren't like that because they would just be like made up characters in a specific time. So it would be like these characters living in Nazi Germany, or these characters living in England in the 1930s, but it wouldn't be like a identifiable person, so it was more believable. I'd be like, okay, yes, let's go along with this family who their daughter is a maid in whatever big house in Wales, right? Like, I could get more into it. Although I liked it, I could have given this book up. Lord of the Flies goes straight into you need to read this. I had read this, I think, a couple times before. This is one I saw in the library and picked up on a whim, and I'm happy I did. I think I read it in 2 days. I read it in the summer, so I was sitting outside reading, and it's just so engrossing. Even though I knew what was going to happen, it's just like you read it and you get goosebumps. It's so powerful, and if you've not read it, I would highly recommend. Happier at Home, I'm putting into fun, light, and easy to read. This is another book by Gretchen Rubin. I do like her. I've got this one here, actually. I think I went to get it out of the library and then I had to take it back, and then I found this copy secondhand. I think it was like £3. I have routinely got this out of the library for like the past 9 years, probably. Every so often I will get this book out. I love it. If you haven't read her book, The Happiness Project, I would recommend you read that because you can do your own happiness project in the coming year. She gives each month a theme, and there'll be like 3 small resolutions for each month around the theme of, I think February is like love and family. January is about clearing up and decluttering, so she has like a digital declutter. She does 15 minutes every day. And then Happier at Home is also a happiness style project, but she was doing that from September for 9 months, I think. December is interior design. January is time, and you can see if I show you the page, and then she's got her resolutions for each day. So I really like her writing. It's really easy to read. It's interesting, and yeah, highly recommend. The next one, Amanda Prowse, Waiting to Begin. Another one I just picked up from the library. I think I actually got this from my granny, and then I was looking at the back and I was like, I'm not sure she'll like this. So I kept it for myself. This is going in fun, light, and easy to read. I read this over a couple of days. I was at a weird time. I feel like I keep saying that. But I feel like books can highlight whatever emotional state you're in. That's why I keep saying it. But this book, I read it at a time where I was feeling really sad, and so it was a strange book to read, but I did enjoy it and I would recommend it. The Children of Men, I'm putting it into you need to read this. I had not read this before. I think I'd seen the film, but I couldn't really remember what happened. And the book is so different from what I remembered the film to be like. It's so good. Another one that I read during the summer sitting outside. It's about this society where people aren't able to have children, and it's like, what does life look like? How do people act? It's following one person, one main character, and then several other characters in their orbit who they become friends with. It's very good. I don't want to say too much about it because I don't want to like overhype it or also put you off reading it. I think you should read this one. I read A House of Sky and Breath. I'm putting this in fun, light, and easy to read, or should I put this into you need to read this? I'm putting this into you need to read this because there's nothing light about this book. It is easy to read, but it's not particularly fun or light. It's the second book in the Crescent City series. It's like a darker version of A Court of Thorns and Roses, I guess. That series is more like fantasy, and while Crescent City is also fantasy, it's much darker, sort of like a murder mystery. I think it belongs in the top category. You need to read this. I would recommend, yeah, I like that. The Guardians I'm putting in, see, I don't want to put it, why have I named this category Fun Light? The Guardians is easy to read. I'm putting it in this category. It's all about this guy who runs this charity trying to get people off of death row. It's a John Grisham book, so you can like guess the kind of structure of it. It's really good. I would also recommend, if you've not read any John Grisham before, The Judge's List. I read that last year or the year before. That was like, oh my gosh, I think I preferred that one to The Guardians. Both are very good. Both are like a good option. They're easy to read. And this one, I read this quite recently. Oh, where am I putting this? I'm also going to put this into Fun, Light and Easy to Read. This is Jen Sincero's book. While I loved it at the time and was like obsessed with it as I was reading it, looking back, there are some, I guess, not problematic, that's so dramatic, but like she's talking about how if you want to make money, you need to put yourself in this situation of like, I need this money. So she's talking about trying to do this like 86 grand course. It costs 86 grand and she's like, I need to find this money so I can do this course. On the surface of it, I'm immediately like, okay, yes, I think everyone's time is really valuable, and certainly 86 grand, like that's a huge amount of money. And if there are people willing to pay that, then why wouldn't you charge that? But there's something about like the way she talked about that kind of money that I didn't really like, which I guess is, she mentions in the book, like different negative beliefs or different like beliefs that we have around money or the way that we talk about money culturally. It's just, I guess, a whole different mindset. But like her advice in that situation was like, if you need money, you're able to get it. And so she thought of someone she knew who had a lot of money and she went and asked them for a loan. And I'm like, okay, but like that's very specific to your circumstances as to whether or not you know someone in your life, not only who has that money, but who you could go up to and be like, with a straight face, be like, I need 86 grand to take a course. You know, like who... I'm not like, this is one side of me, right? And then the other side of my mind is like, yes, like do what you want, like money is abundant, all of this thing, like do whatever makes you happy or whatever you feel you need to do or feel called to do, like there is a way, go do what you want. But I'm like, there has to be some balance. So while I loved reading this book at the time and was like obsessed with it and like, yes, this is gonna happen for me, and who knows, like who knows? I'm, you know, manifesting millions, but like it felt almost unreal in a way of like, this is on a totally different plane of reality for many people. It felt almost distasteful, I guess. I'm not sure. So this is the final ranking. I am quite happy with this. I mean, there's only one in the existential category, but that does make sense given the topic. I've read some good books. I've done this video twice before, not ranking, but just going through reviewing books of the year. In the past, I have read, I think, was it 59 books? And then last year I read 47, and this year I think I've read 25, because 2 of these I've only half read. So that's a bit disappointing, but I have to remind myself that the past 2 years I was doing my degree, so I was also reading a lot for my degree, and they happened sometimes to be books that I enjoyed. I am a bit like, oh, I feel like I've let myself down by not reading more, but this tea is gonna be freezing cold by now. No, I've read some good books this year. I'm filming this on the 6th of December. I may read another book between now and New Year. I've got June out of the library. That's the one I'm gonna read next, I think. Hopefully that will be good. Have you read any of these books that we've gone through? What is your book of the year? What's your favourite thing you've read this year? Please share your book recommendations in the comments. I love reading. I know I've only read 27 books this year, but I really do love reading. And I mentioned a couple have been ones from people who've commented being like, hey, read this book. So like, I am always looking for book recommendations, so please share your favourite book that you've read this year, because not only will I be like, cool, thank you, but anyone else who looks at the comments will be like, cool, thank you. We can all be recommending our favourite books. I will leave my book video from last year where I go through all of the books I've read. I will also leave a video where I talk about the book Finding the Mother Tree. I love that book so much, and I mentioned at the beginning my winter arc video where we talk a bit about capitalism and consumerism, so if that sounds interesting to you, I did say I'd link it in the description. I will also leave it on the screen if you'd like to check that out next. God bless, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.